She emptied her savings account for a rusted-out yacht no one else wanted. The hull was cracked, the engine gutted, and the nameplate was so corroded you could barely read the word solstice. But Ellie Monroe saw something in it, something no one else did. What she didn't know was that hidden inside that broken vessel was a message, a memory, and a miracle waiting to surface. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The marina stank of salt and diesel, a place where broken things came to die slowly in the tide. Ellie Monroe stood at the edge of the dock, wind tangling her hair, a folded check clutched in her oil-stained fingers. She had signed her name on it less than an hour ago, wiping out every dollar she'd scraped together from 10 years of busted knuckles and overnight shifts at her father's old garage. And now that paper was gone, traded for something that looked more like a sunken coffin than a seaworthy dream. The Solstice bobbed gently on the far slip, paint flaking off like scabs, portholes blind with grime. Her name, carved into the wood of the stern, was barely legible through years of corrosion. But Ellie couldn't look away. The yacht was 39 feet of rusted-out memory. Everyone at the auction had passed it up, laughing under their breath about the ghost boat with the cursed past. Rumor said the last family who owned it vanished off the coast 12 years ago. No mayday, no debris, not even oil slicks. Just silence. The Coast Guard called it a freak storm. Locals called it something else. Ellie hadn't believed in curses, not until she stood here, keys in hand, staring at the cracked hull and feeling something old and unspoken staring back. She boarded with cautious steps. The deck creaked under her boots, soft in places like wet cardboard. Below deck, the cabin smelled of mildew and time. Discolored wood paneling peeled like snakeskin. One bench seat had collapsed in on itself, and the galley looked as though it had been ransacked by sea rats and forgotten gods. Yet under all of it, beneath the rot, the ruin, the weight of 1,000 bad decisions, was something Ellie recognized. Structure. Foundation. Just like the old car she grew up fixing, the Solstice had bones worth saving. She ran her hand along the pilot wheel, cracked leather and brass tarnished black. It twitched in her fingers, like the yacht had muscle memory. She knew it was just the wind shifting, but her heart raced anyway. In the corner of the cabin sat a small cabinet with broken hinges. Inside, waterlogged books, and something that looked like a journal, its cover swollen from moisture. Ellie touched it gently, afraid it would crumble, but it didn't. She tucked it under her arm, climbed back above deck, and stood again in the Sunday. From across the marina, 2 men in ball caps snickered and pointed. "You bought that?" one called. Ellie didn't respond. She watched the sun reflect off the warped metal of the bow and felt her chest tighten. This wasn't about the boat anymore. This was about something else. About daring to believe that broken things could be more than their scars. Ellie Monroe had just bought rust. But rust, after all, is only what's left when something fights the sea and lives to tell the tale. By morning, Ellie had set up camp on the deck with a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, and a pry bar. She'd slept curled in the cabin's corner, wrapped in a tarp that smelled like gasoline, too stubborn to leave. She began clearing out the debris, pulling loose paneling, sweeping soggy leaves, and the remains of some long-dead seagull. She worked without music, without distraction. Only the creak of the tide and the occasional call of a gull kept her company. It felt wrong to fill the silence too soon. The Solstice didn't feel empty. It felt like it was listening. She turned her attention to the journal from the cabinet. It was handwritten in black ink, the edges wrinkled and brown. Each page belonged to someone named Ava Whitaker, a mother maybe, or a daughter. Her entries were plain, but oddly poetic descriptions of sunset dinners on the water, mornings spent teaching her son how to tie proper sailor's knots, worries about the approaching hurricane season. Ellie read through them slowly, absorbing each word like it was sacred. Then she reached a final page, where the writing trailed off in the middle of a sentence. "If anything happens to us, I hope someone finds this. I hope they know we were..." The rest was water blurred into nothingness. Ellie closed the book and pressed her hand to the warped tabletop. There was a grief soaked into this yacht, a weight she couldn't ignore. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she did believe in stories, and this boat was full of them. Ava's words lingered in her chest like echoes from another life. That afternoon, Ellie removed a floor panel behind the navigation seat. Underneath was a tangle of old wires and something else. Taped to the inside of the cavity was a faded photograph. A family of 4 two parents, a boy, maybe 10, and a little girl with a wild smile stood on the deck of the Solstice before it aged into the wreck it had become. They looked happy. Real. Not ghosts. Ellie stared at their faces until they blurred. Then she slipped the photo into her jacket. She tried to imagine what the last day on the water had looked like. Had they known something was coming? Had they fought it? Or had it all just stopped? The sun dipped low, casting orange light across the deck. Ellie stood at the helm and imagined the wheel turning under her father's hands, his voice teaching her to feel the boat rather than steer it. He'd never owned one, but he spoke of the sea like it was an old friend. A gust of wind cut through the silence, hard enough to slam the cabin door. Ellie jumped, heart racing. She told herself it was nothing. But in that moment, standing alone on the ghost boat, she felt like someone, or something, was waiting. The next morning, Ellie stood in the engine compartment, hands on her hips, hair tied back with a grease-stained bandana. The engine was a disaster. Corroded block, seized crankshaft. Salt deposits blooming like fungus across every surface. Most would have called it totaled. Scrap metal. But Ellie didn't walk away from things just because they weren't breathing. She hoisted herself down into the cramped belly of the yacht, flashlight clamped between her teeth, and started stripping parts. Each bolt fought her. Each hose crumbled in her fingers. By noon, her hands were bleeding, and she had rust in her eyebrows. But beneath the mess, she began to see the layout. Whoever installed this engine hadn't been lazy, they'd been careful. Precise. Maybe even proud. This was a labor of love, once. And love, Ellie knew, could survive more than most people thought. She removed a steel panel near the fuel lines and froze. Behind it was a carved message, scratched into the metal with something sharp. It read simply, "Don't give up. She always comes back." Ellie ran her fingers over the letters. They weren't just etched, they were driven into the hull. Someone had needed to say it badly enough to make it permanent. She took a break on the dock, watching the light play over the water. The marina was quieter today. Fewer voices, fewer eyes. She felt alone in a way she hadn't, in years, but not in a bad way. The kind of alone that made you honest with yourself. When she returned to the boat, she brought a speaker and played an old playlist her father had made. Blues rock and southern gospel. Music that reminded her of wrenching engines beside him, cussing at stubborn bolts, laughing through pain. The boat didn't seem to mind. The cabin felt a little less cold. By nightfall, Ellie had the engine half dismantled, and a list of parts longer than her arm. She had no sponsor, no garage, no paycheck. Just a dream that she couldn't quite explain. Why this boat? Why now? Even she didn't know. But every hour she spent elbow deep in grease and salt, she felt like she was peeling back. Something important like beneath all the metal and rot. The Solstice still remembered what it meant to move forward. And Ellie? She was starting to believe it could carry her there. Word spread fast in small towns, especially ones with a marina. By the end of the week, Ellie couldn't walk across the dock without someone calling out. "You still trying to make that ghost barge float?" One of the older mechanics joked, grinning around a cigarette. A teenage boy threw a soda bottle into the water and shouted, "You know that thing's cursed, right?" Ellie just kept walking. The local bait shop hung a sign that read, "Bless her heart, she bought the Solstice," and it drew chuckles from passing fishermen. Even her old high school science teacher stopped by to ask, not unkindly, if she was doing okay. But Ellie didn't flinch. Let them laugh. People always mocked what they didn't understand, especially when someone dared to believe in something bigger than themselves. She worked alone most days, dragging old parts out of the hull, taking measurements, making late-night runs for supplies. She sold her backup truck for scrap, pawned her last gold bracelet, and maxed out her credit card to order a refurbished marine diesel engine. The delivery driver raised an eyebrow when he saw the rust bucket she pointed toward. "You sure this thing's seaworthy?" Ellie smiled. "Not yet. But she will be." Every evening she collapsed on the deck, covered in grime and oil, staring up at the stars. She talked to the boat sometimes, like it could hear her. Told it stories about her father, about the first time she rebuilt a carburetor with nothing but a manual and a busted knuckle. Sometimes she read aloud from Ava Whitaker's journal, filling the empty space with the sound of a vanished life. It felt right, like the boat needed to remember who it had been before it could become something new. Then came the night she found the drawing. It was wedged behind the paneling in the galley, folded into quarters and nearly fused with moisture. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear. It was a child's drawing crayon and colored pencil. A sun rising over the ocean. A little boat with a crooked flag. 4 stick figures with big smiles. On the back was a date. August 12, 2011. Ellie's chest tightened. That was 6 days after the yacht was reported lost at sea. She turned it over again. Maybe it was an old drawing, misdated. Maybe it meant nothing. Or maybe it meant everything. The tide rocked the Solstice gently like a cradle. Ellie sat on the deck, drawing in her lap, journal beside her, heart racing. The boat was trying to speak. Not in words, but in pieces. And Ellie? She was listening. The morning fog rolled in thick, curling around the marina like breath from a sleeping giant. Ellie stood barefoot on the deck, cup of instant coffee in hand, and watched the world emerge slowly from the gray. The Solstice had stopped creaking as much. The hull, once soft in places, had been reinforced with new panels, welded and sealed. The engine was due to arrive by freight later that afternoon. She felt something shift subtle, internal, like the boat was beginning to trust her. While clearing out the last storage locker under the aft bench, she pried up the warped flooring and discovered a loose panel that echoed when tapped. She slid a flathead under the lip and lifted. Beneath was a waterproof pouch, military grade, sealed with industrial clips. Her pulse jumped. She brought it into the cabin, set it gently on the table, and began to open it. Inside were documents, coastline maps marked with notes in red ink, photos of lighthouses, journal pages stapled in odd sequences. But in the center was a small locked metal tin. A note was rubber-banded to it. "Do not open unless you believe." Ellie stared at it, her heart thumping against her ribs like a fist against a door. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she spent the next several hours sorting through the other documents. One map had a route marked that veered off standard travel lanes, leading to a cluster of small, unnamed islands. Another had a message scrawled in ink. "The lighthouse saw something. August 14. She sat back, fingers trembling. Ava's journal had ended mid-sentence. The drawing she'd found was dated August 12. Now, this. A clue that something had been witnessed 2 days after the family was declared lost. Could it be real? She turned to the tin again, held it in her hands. It was heavier than it looked, sealed tight. She didn't know what was inside, but she knew one thing: it didn't belong to the sea anymore. That night, lightning lit the horizon, and wind howled through the masts. Rain pounded the deck as Ellie secured loose rigging and climbed below, soaked and shivering. The tin sat on the cabin table like a relic. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered to the storm, "I believe," and the wind stilled, just for a second. Just enough to make her believe the boat had heard her. Ellie didn't see him approach. 1 minute the dock was empty. The next he was there, tall, wiry, with a battered duffel bag and a salt-stained cap pulled low over his eyes. "You Ellie Monroe?" he asked. His voice was quiet but carried weight, like it had crossed oceans. "Depends," she said warily, standing in the hatchway. "Who's asking?" The man stepped forward and held out a photograph. It was a copy of the same family portrait Ellie had found in the boat, only this one had writing on the back. Property of U.S. Coast Guard Archives Case 407F. I was the investigator on the Whitaker disappearance, he said. Name's Daniel Knox. Ellie's blood ran cold. She stepped onto the dock, still holding the tin. Why are you here now? Knox hesitated. Because 3 days ago, a lighthouse off the Outer Banks sent in a report. Same boat silhouette, same nameplate, matching distress frequency. 12 years late. She almost dropped the tin. He nodded toward the Solstice. We never found wreckage. Nothing ever washed up. But I knew somehow it wasn't over. You found something, didn't you? Ellie looked down at the tin, then back at the man's weathered face. She opened it. Inside, a faded audio cassette, a silver pendant with Ava's initials, and a sealed letter. The envelope said, "To the next one who listens." She handed him the cassette. You still got a way to play this? Knox smiled sadly. I never throw anything away. They sat in her truck and ran the tape. Static. Then a voice, warbling and distant. This is Ava Whitaker, August 13. The storm came fast. We lost the radio. We're safe, anchored off a small island. We think someone's watching us. If anyone finds this, please know, we didn't drown. We're not lost. We were taken. The tape clicked off. Silence. Knox looked pale. They weren't lost, Ellie whispered. They were hidden. And suddenly, the Solstice wasn't just a broken boat anymore. It was a message in a bottle. And Ellie? She had just uncorked it. Continues in next message, chapters 7 to 10, including the miraculous ending. Here is the final continuation of your complete 5-0-word script. Mechanic girl purchased a rusted yacht. With her life savings, the ending was miraculous. Chapters 7 through 10. 500 words each. Full paragraph form. Cinematic tone. Emotional realism. The letter felt warm in Ellie's hands, like it had been waiting to be opened by someone who wouldn't just read it but carry it forward. Knox stood beside her on the deck of the Solstice. Arms crossed, face unreadable. She broke the wax seal and unfolded the pages with care. The handwriting was unmistakably Ava's looping, precise, almost like a lullaby written in ink. To whoever finds this, you've already found more than most would dare to look for. This boat has stories etched into every bolt, every board. We didn't vanish, we were pulled away. There's something on those islands, something that sees, that remembers, that waits. I don't know if we'll ever leave, but if this letter reaches the shore, know this. We were alive, we loved, and we believed. Someone would come. Ellie's eyes burned, but she kept reading. Ava described a series of strange events, flickering lights on the horizon, voices at night that didn't echo right, and most haunting of all, a man who walked the island barefoot, silent, with eyes like polished silver. He doesn't speak, but he listens. She'd written, and somehow we feel safe around him, as if he's not keeping us there, but protecting us from something else. Ellie let the letter fall to her lap. Daniel Knox sat beside her, rubbing his jaw with one hand like he was holding back an entire world of questions. You think they're still alive? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. I think, he said softly, that people don't leave messages like this unless they believe someone will find them. I think you were meant to. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. She sat on the deck with the cassette player, looping Ava's voice until the batteries died. The yacht creaked gently beneath her, but it no longer felt haunted. It felt guided, like it had waited 12 years to bring someone back to the place it couldn't return to on its own. At dawn, Ellie made a decision. She would finish the restoration. She would install the new engine. She would map the course marked on Ava's notes. Not because she believed in legends or wanted attention, but because somewhere out there, a story had been paused, not ended. And she? She intended to press play. Ellie's hands moved like they were guided by something older than instinct. Each bolt, each wire, each section of the new diesel engine slipped into place, as if the boat remembered how it used to breathe. Daniel Knox stayed on the dock most days, helping when he could, silent when she needed space. He said little, but his presence steadied her, like an anchor she hadn't known she needed. The locals stopped laughing. A few even offered parts, advice, free coffee. Someone donated a new marine radio. The same bait shop that once mocked her now offered her free dock space and cold sandwiches. It wasn't pity. It was awe. Ellie was doing something few had dared, chasing a ghost not to bury it, but to set it free. The launch day came quietly. No big announcement. Just Ellie in her old boots, Knox in a borrowed rain jacket, and the Solstice sitting in the water like it had never known rust. The paint wasn't perfect. The finish was uneven, but the soul of the boat had returned. The key turned, and the engine hummed not loud, not boastful, just steady, alive. Ellie plotted the course Ava had left in the maps, a 4-day trip if the weather held. She packed light, journal, letter, audio tape, spare tools, her father's wrench for luck. Daniel joined her without needing to be asked. "Someone has to witness this," he said. As they left the harbor, the wind picked up, warm and constant. The sky cleared, even as the horizon darkened. The yacht cut through the waves like it belonged to them. On the second night, they hit fog thick, blinding, absolute. Ellie killed the engine and drifted. And in the stillness, they heard something. Music, faint, like lullabies played through water. Neither of them spoke. They just listened. The fog lifted an hour later. And there, rising from the sea like memory made solid, was an island that wasn't on any modern chart. A single lighthouse blinked slowly. Then again. And Ellie knew. This was it. The place the water had tried to forget. But memory, like love, leaves marks. Even on the tide, Ellie dropped anchor just offshore, unsure if she was ready to set foot on whatever truth lay waiting. Knox stood beside her, binoculars up. "There," he whispered, handing them to her. Through the lens, she saw them 2 figures standing on the beach. One tall, one small. The tall figure raised a hand. Ellie's legs buckled. They went ashore by dinghy. As they got closer, Ellie saw the figures clearly. A man and a girl. The girl wore the same pendant Ellie had found in the tin. The man's eyes. They were silver, just as Ava had written. They didn't speak, but the girl stepped forward and held out a seashell, painted with a sunrise. On the back, scrawled in small, childish handwriting, was a name, Lily Whitaker. Ellie fell to her knees. Over the next hours, others emerged from the trees. A woman with familiar eyes. A boy, now nearly grown. Ava herself. Weathered, but real, alive. Not ghosts, survivors. Protected, as Ava had written, by something no one understood. Time had passed differently here. The lighthouse, the man, the island, all part of something ancient, something unexplainable. Ellie handed Ava the journal, the audio tape, the letter. The woman cried, then laughed, then hugged Ellie so hard she couldn't breathe. Daniel stood off to the side, shaking his head in disbelief. "I filed that report," he murmured. "I buried the case, and you brought it back to life." They didn't stay long. The island's rules were unspoken. Ava and her family chose to remain, but they gave Ellie something before she left, a sealed envelope and Lily's shell. "Tell our story," Ava whispered, "and let the solstice carry others home." As the yacht pulled away from the beach, Ellie felt the weight of the world shift. Not heavier, lighter, like something lost had been found again. Back in the harbor, Ellie's return felt like a dream. No press, no cameras, just a girl tying off her boat, stepping onto dry land, and carrying a story no one would believe except those who needed to. She opened the envelope from Ava later that night. Inside was a single page. To Ellie, "You weren't just the one who found us. You were the reason we could come back. Thank you for seeing what others missed. Thank you for listening." The Solstice stayed moored at Dock 7, but Ellie didn't stop. She started something new, a marine restoration co-op dedicated to recovering sunken and abandoned vessels. She called it Project Solstice. Survivors, wanderers, And believers showed up in droves. She gave them space, she gave them hope. Sometimes, when the fog rolled in thick, she swore she could hear music faint, like a memory humming. And every time she touched the wheel of the solstice, it felt like a heartbeat. The boat no longer smelled of mildew. The floor no longer creaked with sadness. It had been made whole, not just with tools, but with truth. And Ellie? She no longer wondered if she'd done the right thing. She knew. Because some ships are never meant to sink. Some stories are never meant to be silenced. And some miracles don't come loud, or sudden, but in the form of rust, memory, and the courage to believe. The girl who bought a broken yacht with her last dollar had given a lost family a second chance. And in doing so, she found her own.